up, everybody? Kevin here with a little special bonus for you in the Freedom Ticket. I've got my good friend Rich Goldstein here. Rich, how you doing, man?
Doing well. Thanks, Kevin.
Rich is one of the best patent and trademark attorneys out there for anybody. But he works with a lot of my friends, a lot of Amazon sellers. I've done some stuff with him. I see him at a lot of events. He speaks at a lot of different Amazon-related events. Written a book on the subject. So I wanted to bring him on to explain a little bit more about patents and trademarks for you guys, just so it's a little bit confusing. There's a little bit of misinformation out there, and I want you to hear it from an expert and straight from someone who knows what they're talking about and lives and breathes this stuff. So, Rich, man, so how's it going?
It's going well. Thanks, Kevin.
Sure. So, getting a trademark on Amazon has become more and more important. One of the things I tell my students all the time is that should be one of the very first things you do, is because it takes, like in the United States, it takes 9 months or sometimes more to actually get a trademark. In some countries, it can be even longer than that. Some are shorter than that. But without a trademark on Amazon, you're basically a sitting duck, because not only is it easy for someone to come in and jump on your listing, whether it's a counterfeit or not a counterfeit. They can also, you also lose a lot of advanced privileges that Amazon gives you. For example, you can't do what's called EBC, or enhanced brand content, which is the extra photos and the extra content that's down at the bottom where the description is. You don't get to run the headline ads on Amazon, which are those big banners at the top. You don't get the brand analytics data, the data where Amazon tells you this is what the top 1 million basically keywords are, and which ones are converting, and the conversion share, and all this really cool information. And you don't get the ability to put videos on your listing. With a registered trademark on Amazon, to get brand registry, you could actually put a video in your 7th image spot, which can make a huge difference on your conversions. So you don't really want to wait around to get a trademark on Amazon. And some people do it themselves, and there's different services out there. But I recommend that you use an attorney, because an attorney can actually, they know the little pitfalls, and they know little stumbling blocks, because I've done a few through a couple of services. Like I paid like $89 or something, and did it myself, and I actually had a problem. I actually got about 3 on one of them. I filed about 16 or 17 trademarks or so, and on one of those back in 2016, I was like 3 or 4 months in on the trademark, and I was in manufacturing on this product. It was some dog bowls, and I came back that it passed the initial muster, but when the attorneys over in Washington, D.C. Were looking at it, they're like, you know what, this is a little bit too close to something else that's out there, and we're not going to be able to prove this. I was like, well, why not? Can we just change the letter or something? Like, no, it's still going to be too confusing. And so I ended up having to actually create new molds, and had to stop production, had to create new molds, spend like $5,000 or something, which I probably could have avoided if I would have paid a little bit extra money to a trademark attorney to properly to do it right. So, Rich, tell us a little bit about the process and your experience in helping Amazon sellers with doing trademarks.
Absolutely. First of all, it's a very common experience that you had there, and a couple of things I want to hit on. Number one is, when there's value at stake, it pays to have someone help you with it. If you're at the early stages of creating a brand that you think is going to be valuable, worthwhile, you're about to invest money into production, into inventory, it might pay to just get the right advice in the beginning about the trademark. The actual application itself takes about 10 minutes to file, but the key is really deciding what to file, the strategy in the beginning. And I think that's where it really pays, if there's value at stake, to have someone that knows, help steer the ship before you leave port. And also, you mentioned when you were going back and forth with the trademark office, saying, can we change a letter? Can we change this or that? A lot of times, you just can't change those things, and so you lose time. So 6 months in, the application is being reviewed by the trademark attorney at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and they'll notice something, and they'll say, well, wait a second, the way you're using this mark doesn't match the way in which you applied. You applied for it with a space between the two words, and it looks like on your packaging there is no space. And you can't change things like that often once it's been filed. So then you lose time and you have to start over again. So that's one of the pitfalls too, is that often things that you might want to change because they weren't done correctly in the beginning, you're just not able to change and you have to start over again.
Well, I know like filing a trademark depends on your class, because when you do a trademark, you have to choose the class and you have to be very specific, like what
Yes.
type of product it is, and there's different classes. So people can have the same mark if they're in different classes sometimes. That's why you might see, you're driving down the street and you might see a chain that's called, I don't know, Pizza Hut, or that's probably not a good example, but you know, it's called some name, and then you see the same name in another city or another national chain that's in a completely different category. And so you have to be very specific in the category, and each category that you file in costs additional money. Um,
Yes.
and so
Correct.
some of these big companies, I had this another problem with a trademark, a different one, where actually it went through the process. And what happens with a trademark is you file the papers. I'm sure you can explain this better, but in my experience, you file the papers. There's an initial cursory check, and then it goes through a process, and eventually an attorney takes a look at it at the Patent and Trademark Office. If it passes their muster, then it gets actually what's called published, and it goes out in this like a it's probably electronic now. Maybe it's still a book. I'm not sure, but
Hmm.
it goes out, and there's attorneys and services that actually monitor this. And I actually had one called a company called, one of my products is called Elite Beauty Cosmetics. And was a company based in Switzerland, I think it was, the Elite Modeling Agency or something like that, which is a big
Hmm.
modeling agency. Turns out they had filed trademarks in about, I don't know, some ridiculous 500 or 1,000 different classes for the word elite, something crazy. And they actually disputed my mark. They actually said, no, this is even though you're doing cosmetics, it's too close to ours. There's too much confusion, and I got a nasty letter from them. And you know, I could have fought it, but it wasn't worth fighting it. But this was
Yeah.
like 6 7 months in, so this is a big company with deep pockets. I was like, screw it. So again, I had to change it all over again. I mean, completely change the brand name and completely change everything. So, how much does it cost actually? Typically, what's a ballpark range for an attorney to get involved? What's someone looking at?
I would say it's about $1,000 to get an application filed with an attorney. Expect to spend maybe another 500 to 1,000 on just little things that come up. Oftentimes, even when it's done by an attorney, there will be a few minor issues that need to be dealt with the trademark office. So, for example, you set forth what products and services you're using it with, and there might be just a little bit of wording change that needs to take place. And in those additional steps through the process, you might expect to spend another 500 to $1,000. So I'd say overall budget $2,000 to have the process handled from beginning to end. And just hitting on something that you mentioned there, you talked about publication. So when the mark is approved by the trademark office, they publish it for opposition. This is what Kevin was describing. And after it's published for opposition, if there is no person that objects to it within 30 days, then the mark actually will be registered. So that's the typical way in which a mark is processed. But you know what I wanted to share with you today was a bit about establishing trademarks for brand registry, because as you said before, having brand registry can make a big difference and for your seller account, for your business. So, first of all, in general, trademarks are used to protect things like product names, logos, slogans, color schemes, and other ways in which products are distinguished from other products in the marketplace. But for the purposes of Amazon Brand Registry, we mostly just care about the name, not the logo, not the slogans. We care about what's called the word mark. And again, in general, trademark law is meant to prevent confusion among consumers. And when a competitor uses your mark in a way that creates a likelihood of confusion, that can be trademark infringement. But in order to register a mark, it has to be distinctive. So it has to not only be distinctive from other marks in the field, in other words, it can't be confusingly similar to other previously registered trademarks, but it has to also be something which is known as being inherently distinctive, which means even putting aside all of the competition, is it the type of name that's distinctive enough to be registered? And I'm going to explain this right now. So first of all, when it comes to distinctiveness, it falls on a spectrum that goes from one extreme to the other. On one extreme, we have what's called generic marks. And on the other extreme, it's arbitrary or coined. So generic is when it's just the name that you'd use to ask for the product. So if you're looking for tables, you call it a table. So table is generic. The next level up is something that's descriptive. It's not exactly the name that you use to call for the product, but it's something that describes a quality or an aspect of the product, like red licorice. A step above that is what's called suggestive. Now, suggestive is where you're not directly describing the product, but you're implying an image that is favorable to the consumer. So, for example, Airbus for airplanes. So it's not the product that you're selling isn't a bus, but Airbus implies perhaps something that's spacious, that's efficient, and so the mark Airbus is a suggestive mark that's used in the field of aviation. Arbitrary is the next step up. Arbitrary is when it's a real word like apple, but it's being used with something that word shouldn't typically have an association with. So Apple computer. Apple has nothing to do with computers, so it's arbitrary. So an arbitrary mark where you have a word that's being borrowed from some other area being used as a trademark becomes a very strong trademark because there's really no reason why a competitor would need to use anything similar to that. If they tried to call their product Orange Computers even, doesn't sound at all like Apple, but in some way it's most likely being done just to confuse the consumers into thinking that they're you. And then the most protectable trademark is what's called coined marks. So coined marks are when you make up a word like Xerox or Kodak, and that can give you the most protection. So in general, protectable marks are from suggestive up to coined. Those are the areas that are protectable. On the other hand, not protectable are things that are generic or descriptive. Now, the problem I often encounter when I'm speaking with Amazon sellers is that they want to protect a name that is very descriptive, that directly describes the product. And so you really want to avoid this. You want to avoid picking a descriptive name. And so a lot of times for trademark purposes, you want to have a mark that's at least suggestive, and a coined or a made-up term is definitely best to have something that's as distinctive as possible. But on the other hand, for search purposes, you may want to have descriptive terms in the name. So if you're selling pet food, you'd say, hey, I want it to say pet food because people are searching for pet food. Or if you're selling lawn furniture, you want those terms in there because you want people to find it in a search. So now there's a compromise that you can come to here between the trademark purposes and the searching purposes. And the compromise is if you have a descriptive name, you add a distinctive term. So you could still call it pet food, but say it's Munchie Time pet food. That extra term, that extra distinctive term helps it. And similarly, Beach Barn lawn furniture. I don't know what a beach barn is, but having a distinctive, arbitrary term like that in there helps you to get protection while you still have the search terms in the name. So Beach Barn lawn furniture, still very searchable. So that's a good way to have the best of both worlds. Now, here's a couple of pitfalls. A lot of times when people are going through the trademark process, and they have something that's descriptive. So they're saying, I want to register the name, Best Pet Food Store. And there is an option available for these people to get what's called a supplemental registration, which is kind of like a registration on probation. So you can get a supplemental registration and use the R with a circle around it, symbol next to it. But the problem is that it won't be accepted into brand registry if you do this. Same thing is sometimes people try to register their logo in conjunction with the name of the mark. So it's pet food store with a logo. Now the trademark office says you can't do that, but if you disclaim pet food store, now the overall image with the logo and with the name pet food store will give you a trademark on that. But what they're really giving you a trademark on is that overall combination. So again, Amazon is wise to this. And if you do that, you won't get into brand registry. So these are two things to be wary of. is that if you're going through the process and you have the option to go on the supplemental register, or if you're going to be doing the logo with the name and then they ask you to disclaim the name, you might get a registration, but you're not going to end up in brand registry. So then, kind of in summary, if you're registering a mark for brand registry, you want it to be a word mark. You don't want to do a logo mark. As I said before, there's different ways in which you could apply for the trademark, but you want to apply for the name or the phrase only, because that's what Amazon is going to accept. And it needs to be on the principal registry. So if going through the process, you get rejected and they say, well, you can get on the supplemental registration, don't do it. Fight for the principal registry, because if you get on the supplemental registry, you're not going to get into brand registry. And also that it must be for the type of product or service that you're selling. And the truth is they don't always check. But as I've spoken with Kevin about before, a lot of times these rules tighten up over time. So you might find yourself sneaking in only to get kicked out later. And then a last tip is that when you're going through this process and completing your brand registration, you do that in your seller account. You ask for brand registry within the seller account. But then there's a step in which Amazon will contact the attorney of record at the trademark office for your attorney to verify ownership. So they're going to use that as a way to make sure that you are the legitimate person who owns the mark and is also the person who holds the seller account. So in general, those are my quick tips for establishing trademarks for brand registry.
That's awesome. So that, like I was saying earlier, you really need to do brand registry as soon as you can. And sometimes people ask me, like, well, I don't know what I'm going to sell. I just started learning about how to sell on Amazon. I don't know if I'm going to sell baby products, or if I'm going to sell automotive products, or if I'm going to sell sports and outdoors. So how can I come up with a name for a brand name or a name for my product without knowing what I'm going to sell? And what I always recommend people, and correct me if you would advise differently, Rich, is I say, well, at least when you get your trademark your company name, whatever your corporate name is, or your company name, have a big, like an umbrella name, and that could be generic. It could be, I don't know, a little bit more generic, like King Enterprises Inc. or whatever it may be. And then later on, once I figure out what I'm going to do, then I can do additional trademarks on that. But some people are like, you know what? I don't have the kind of money to do that. I can't afford to just keep spitting out money for trademarks. But it's so important, unless if you really know what you're going to sell, and then do that. But if you don't know and it's going to take you a few months, I would recommend spending the money if you can, because you really need that to take advantage of all the advanced features of selling on Amazon, and to have some level of protection on Amazon from people taking advantage of your or doing a lot of nasty things that sometimes happen.
Yes, absolutely. And I would say in general, maybe a step beyond that is if you have in mind that you're going to sell all kinds of different products, but you don't know all the categories you're going to be in, but you do know one. So at least do the application for the one category that you do know you're going to be selling in. And it's very common to file trademarks later for other categories. So you have big companies like Coca-Cola or Harley-Davidson. Harley-Davidson decides they're going to sell toothbrushes. So then they apply for Harley-Davidson on the toothbrushes. They've had their mark for motorcycles for 100 years or however long it is. But once they branch out into a new area, then they do a new application. And along those same lines, a lot of times people say, there's 5 categories in which we plan to sell products. And they want to put them all in the same application. The problem is, if you actually start selling in only one category, and the other categories you don't get around to, maybe you're not going to get around to for a few years, you're going to hold up the registration with those other categories. Because in order to complete the registration, you have to actually be using the product in commerce in that category, or in each category in which you've applied. So the point is, and following along with what Kevin is suggesting, at least apply in one category. And we can do others later. And actually, it makes sense to do others later if you're not going to launch all the products at the same time.
The same thing, like you said, to make sure you do it for the word mark, and not not necessarily the image mark. You can do both at the same time. It costs a little bit more, right? And you can also come back and pay a fee later to add the logo or the logo mark at a later time as well.
Yeah, and then generally I recommend doing them separately anyway, because you want the word mark to protect that phrase, so that if someone is using a name or phrase similar to it, you want them to be infringing regardless of what type of logo they use, and vice versa. If someone is using a logo like yours but with a different name or phrase, you want to be able to enforce that regardless of whether they're using your name or phrase. So in best of all worlds, we do them separately anyway.
Can you, just for to make sure people understand, can you explain the difference between copyrights, trademarks, and patents?
Okay, yeah.
People get those confused a lot of times.
Simple framework for that. I mean, when you think of patents, think products, like product ideas, like things that make the product itself different. When you think trademarks, think of brands. So brands, brand names, like logos, ways in which you identify whose product it is. That's a trademark. And when you think copyright, think content. So copyright is for the content, the words, the content of a video, the content of a song, of a book. So in general, content is protected with copyright. Patents protect products, and brands are protected with trademarks.
For example, one of the things that I do is I create a lot of unique images for my products. I'll go out and I'll shoot models, and spend a lot of money creating imagery. And I have a problem sometimes with Chinese guys or other people taking my photos and photoshopping in their product in my model's hands or something. So what I do, I mean, in the U.S., you pretty much have rights once the content is actually created. There are some given rights, but in order to enforce those rights, it's my understanding that you really actually need to have a copyright on those to have a little bit more power to enforce those. And so I actually file a copyright on some of my imagery as well, just to have that on file and have that documented. And that process doesn't take nearly as long, and it's not very expensive. I don't know what, I haven't done it in about a year or so. It was the last time I did it, but it was like $20-$30 or something for copyright as actual fee or something like that.
Yeah, I think it might be about 40, but I don't really typically get involved in registering copyrights either, because it is the type of thing that an individual can do on their own.
Yeah, like, it's really easy.
It's a spectrum of things. A copyright you absolutely can do on your own. A trademark, perhaps you could do on your own, although, as I said before, if there's value at stake, you might want to have an attorney involved to help steer the process and set the strategy for it. And a patent absolutely can't do on your own. So that's kind of the spectrum of it. But again, returning to copyright, absolutely you could do on your own. It involves just filling out a form and paying the fee, which I think is $40 currently. And you're right, is that when you create a work, when it's fixed in a tangible form, is what the law says. Basically meaning that if it's a book that you've actually written it down, or it's in your word processor, it's fixed in tangible form. If it's a song, that it's recorded. If it's an image, that it's actually acquired by a camera or some other imaging device, that copyright protection attaches. But as far as enforcement, as Kevin said, having the registered copyright makes a big difference and is a prerequisite in many forums for enforcing it.
Now, I hear a lot of people sometimes, a lot of people are just doing private label where they're finding something on Alibaba and just kind of changing the product a little bit and putting their logo or their name on it. But other people actually may have some sort of unique invention. They develop something from scratch or some sort of unique product. And a common question I get asked is, should I patent this, or can my Chinese manufacturer steal this from me? Is it okay if I tell them, my idea, or are they just going to steal it from me? What would you recommend in that case if someone has actually developed their own kind of unique product and they want to talk to manufacturers to actually say, hey, what's it going to cost me to make this, or can you do this, or to just give them a little bit of protection? Do they need to go ahead and spend $5,000-$10,000 to file a patent? I know there's two different types of patents. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I would say maybe not. I mean, really what it comes down to is if you've come up with something new, if you've come up with an enhancement for a product, then it's possible to protect it. And that would be the way to prevent other people from doing something similar, or to prevent being ripped off when you show it to an overseas manufacturer. But the question is, well, what can you actually get a patent on? Because a lot of times you think it's entirely new, but if we researched it, we'd find out that, well, okay, um, the concept that you've come up with isn't all that new, but maybe this detail is distinct enough to get a patent. And so someone might tell you, yes, you can get a patent on this, but the point is always figure out what can you get a patent on? What's different about it? And when you look at what's different about it, then the next question to ask is this going to matter to the market? Is the market going to care about this feature? Is the market going to care if you use this type of hinge and if that's what you're able to get a patent on? Because if they don't, then there's no point in getting a patent on it. So if the market doesn't care, if your competitors aren't going to look at the product and say, well, we need to make it that way in order to be competitive, if they're not going to do that, then there's no point in having the patent. So we always want to figure out what exactly makes it different, what exactly makes it patentable, and that's what helps figure out whether it's really worth doing. Beyond that, as Kevin mentioned, there's two different types of patents. So there's a utility patent and a design patent. Utility patent is when there's structural differences to the product that are for a functional purpose. So you have a different mechanism, a different way that the product operates. That could be a utility patent. Design patent is strictly about the shape of the product. Like there could be a design patent on this bottle, and all the design patent does is prevent people from making a bottle that has that shape, that has that look to it. And in the past, utility patents were considered much more valuable than design patents because it protected a concept. With a design patent, if the competitor makes it look different, they're not going to infringe your patent. So people would say, well, do you really need to bother with a design patent? Plus, you have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to enforce it. But now Amazon has flipped that upside down, because on Amazon, if you have a product that has a fairly distinctive appearance to it, you get a design patent on it, and then a competitor makes a product that looks like yours, you do an IP complaint with Amazon, and they'll look at it and they'll say, looks like it, and they'll shut them down. A lot of times unfairly, they shut people down based upon a design patent. But I think the lesson to be learned is that since Amazon is deferring to IP owners, it pays to be an IP owner. So if you have a product that's distinctive in look, it pays to get a design patent. Utility patents cost north of $10,000 to get. Design patents typically a few $1,000s. So if you're selling a product that is all distinctive, it becomes a no-brainer to do a design patent, because the cost of the design patent can be a few days worth of sales when a competitor has jumped into the market and is selling a product just like yours. If you could shut them down and save yourself even a few days worth of sales on many products, it's worth it.
So it costs a couple grand roughly to get a design patent. How long does it take to get approved or get that? How long is the process on that? Like a trademark is roughly 9 months. How long is a process on a design patent typically?
It takes about a year on average to get a design patent, and you could expedite the process of getting a design patent. So there's a fee. It's a few $100 fee that you pay to have the design patent process expedited. Then it takes maybe about 6 months to get, and there's a few extra steps you have to take, like you have to do a search to be eligible to enter that expedited program. So there's a few extra steps you'd have to take, but if you need to expedite it, it's certainly available.
Cool. So and that would just cover your design patent. If you do it in the U.S., that's just going to cover you in the U.S. That's not going to prevent some Chinese manufacturer from stealing your concept and selling it in Europe or selling it in China or wherever, correct?
Correct. And in general, you need a patent in whatever jurisdiction that you want to prevent people from making, using, or selling the product. So if you want to if you're worried about people selling the product in Europe, then you'd need a patent in Europe. And it gets very expensive. And that's why you need to make those decisions really carefully about whether it's worth it for a particular product.
So that could be an opportunity for people. Find something that's selling well in Europe that's unique, that may be patented in Europe, but they haven't done it in the U.S., and knock them off.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
Absolutely.
and so what can they do, though? if that was to happen, if I was to see something that's really cool in Europe, I'm on vacation, or I saw something that's selling really cool and on Amazon, and I see it's patented in Europe, but they haven't done it in the U.S., and I say, okay, I'm going to knock them off, maybe make a slight little change, but it's pretty similar. Start selling in the U.S. What recourse would they have? Could they? What could they do?
They wouldn't. They wouldn't have any recourse. I mean, they don't have the right to stop you from making, using, or selling it in the U.S.
Okay, so the big.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why, Kevin, I'm really passionate about Amazon sellers understanding this stuff, because not only is it about not getting screwed, but it's about opportunities. The more you understand about how this works, there are often many opportunities to exploit things just like that.
Mm-hmm. But they couldn't even really sue you or issue a cease and desist. Or I guess they could. They can do whatever they want, but a cease and desist. But if they don't have it, or
if there's no U.S. patent,
and there's no dispute process on a patent, right? So it's not like the trademarks where it's published for review. On a patent, they can't find out. Oh, Kevin just filed a patent on my patented product in Europe.
That's a separate thing. There, let's. I just will stop you right there, because if you see a product overseas, you can't apply for a patent in the U.S. You can make it. I mean, they can't stop you from making it. But in order to apply first of all, in order to apply in the U.S., you have to have actually invented it. You can't just see a product and then file here.
Okay, that's what I was clarifying. Okay.
Yeah, but you can certainly make it here. You can certainly make, use, and sell it here. The other thing is,
if you do that, if you make, use, and sell it here, then they can't. They could then come behind you and actually file the patent because they are the inventor.
No, not necessarily. That's the other thing
enforce it for. Okay, go ahead.
Is that generally when you're doing international patents, it has to be done around the same time. So I can't explain all the rules, but I'll just give you some guidelines. Is that typically, if you're going to apply in the U.S., within a year, you make the decision of whether you're going to apply anywhere else in the world. And if you don't, let's say you apply in the U.S. and you don't apply within a year, but then you apply in Europe, you wouldn't be able to claim priority from your U.S. application. So this is already getting a little complicated, but the point is that if a significant amount of time has gone by, let's say you apply for a patent in the U.S., it gets approved, it's issued, so now, let's say a year and a half after filing, you've gotten your U.S. patent, it's absolutely too late to apply elsewhere in the world. Once that application becomes published like that, then you can't file anywhere else. So it's not like you can come back 5 years later and apply in Japan or apply in China or anywhere else. They all have to be done around the same time. So again, it's getting into some complex patent law rules about how it works. But in the typical case where they've patented in Europe, they're selling it in Europe, you see it, you start selling it in the U.S., they're not going to be able to apply for a patent to stop you.
Well, that happens too with some, I mean, just to clarify too, like in the U.S., sometimes you'll see an infomercial, a product, and I know this happened with a few years ago with these balloons. Like there's some guy, he invented this device that would, blow up water balloons. Because if you're filling up water balloons, it takes like, you got to put it under the faucet and do another one, If you're going to have your kids in the backyard have a water balloon fight, to fill up 100 balloons might take you an hour or something of water. But he'd developed some sort of device where you could attach all these balloons. It'd fill up like 100 of them in a minute or a couple minutes or something. He applied for a patent on that in the U.S. It was patent pending. Well, in the meantime, one of these big infomercial companies saw the product, thought it was a good idea. They basically stole it, knocked it off, and they were actually able to run infomercials for about a year while his patent was pending without having to have any worry about any recourse or anything. Just basically blatantly just stole it from him.
Yep. Yes, and that's probably more the exception than the rule, but it's certainly possible. I mean, here's the thing. When you've applied for a patent and it's patent pending, what you've done is you've established priority for it. You've established the fact that if anyone's going to get the patent, it's going to be you, and no one's going to sneak ahead of you to get the patent. So that's part of the protection. But you can't actually stop anyone from making, using, or selling it while it's patent pending. You need to actually get the patent. You need to have it approved and issued. So typically when you're patent pending, the general advice is it's fairly safe to go out there in the world with it because you've established your priority for it. So yes, you can, yes, you can stop other people from making, using, or selling it. But generally when people see that it's patent pending, it tends to keep most people away. Because part of it is they don't know how long it's been patent pending for. And unless you've told them when you applied, for all they know, you applied a year and a half ago and you're going to get the patent tomorrow. And if they invest a couple $100,000 in tooling and inventory, and all of a sudden you get the patent and you're able to stop them from making, using, or selling it, then that would be a waste or that would be a problem on their part. So the general advice is that patent pending has significant value in that it tends to keep most people away. But you're right, there's always people that will exploit the cracks and they'll do things exactly like what you described.
So if I've developed a new product, while my patent is, I come to you, I file my patent, it's pending. I'm talking to my before I talk to my Chinese manufacturer, maybe I'm making it in the U.S. or whatever. Should I notify them that, hey, this is patent pending before I give them the concepts and the files, or should I make them sign an NDA, or what should I do to try to help give me a little bit of protection, maybe?
Well, both if possible. I mean, first of all, as far as patent pending, yes. And here's the guideline: tell them that's patent pending, but don't tell them when you filed. Don't tell them that you filed last week. Just tell them that it's patent pending, and don't give out the serial number, which people tend to like to do. Someone asked them for a patent number, and they have this filing receipt with a serial number. No, don't give them that, because I could look at any serial number and tell you when the application was filed just based upon other serial numbers that I know of with other cases that I'm working on. So
could they not go and search by my name in the patent?
You can't. Well, that's the thing. When it's pending, you can't search it.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, unless it's published. Sometimes applications are published after 18 months, but let's put that aside for a moment. But in general, you can't search for a pending application. And so don't give out the serial number. And the other thing you asked about is the NDA. So if they're willing to sign an NDA, by all means, have them sign an NDA. NDAs aren't particularly valuable, though, because all it is a contract where someone is promising that they're not going to disclose your idea to someone else. But then if all of a sudden you see your product on the market, in order to prevail, you'd need to prove that the person that signed the NDA was involved in that product getting on the market. If you have the patent, you don't need to prove any of that. You just, there's the product. This is my patent. You're infringing. So in my view, the value of NDAs is that it gets good people to behave well. So in other words, it's like if I had Kevin sign an NDA before I told him about my idea, and then he's at lunch later, before he's maybe talked to a friend of his to tell him, like, oh, like a guy was in my office today and he had a pretty cool idea. Just making conversation. He's not trying to do anything wrong. But if he signed an NDA, he'd think twice about it. He'd be like, oh, yeah, that's right. This is confidential. So NDAs remind people, like, oh, yeah, this is supposed to be confidential. So they tend to be more careful about it. Whereas without an NDA, people might say, oh, yeah, I know a guy working on something like that. Just not that they're trying to do anything wrong. It's just they're not thinking of it as seriously as if, oh, we've signed a contract that says that you're telling me this on the confidential circumstances. That makes sense?
Makes sense.
And
cool.
And so, but I don't think it does much for bad actors. I don't think NDAs keep bad people from doing bad things.
Awesome. Well, this has been really helpful, and I think a lot of people, all the Freedom Ticket students and everything that are watching this, are going to find some great value in this. And I feel free, Rich, if someone wants to, if they want to get a trademark or they want to explore the patent, how would they reach out to you, or what? How would they contact you? What's the best way?
All right, let me see. Let me just put my slide back here for a second. It's got contact info. So here's my contact info. And if you're working with Kevin, if you're a student of Kevin's, you can contact me directly. And so there's my email address. It's goldstein@goldsteinpc.com. You could also call me directly on that number, 212-656-9100. And I'll actually offer something else to your students. If you want to learn about patents, and we didn't get to talk too much about patents, I wrote a book for the American Bar Association. It's called the ABA Consumer Guide to Obtaining a Patent. So it's really their book that's meant for entrepreneurs on how to protect your idea and how to learn about the process. And for Kevin's students, if you send me an email, I'll send you a copy of the book. In particular, send me an email with your mailing address, and I'll send you a copy of the book.
That worldwide?
Okay, no. So I'll tell you what, if you're within the U.S., I will send you a copy of the book. If you're not in the U.S., then just feel free to ask me a question on the house, or send me an email with any questions that you have. And like I said, this is just for your students. So typically when clients come to the firm, they go through my people first, and I work with clients that are already paying clients. But your people can contact me with questions, and you're within the U.S., I'd be happy to send you a copy of my book.
That's awesome. That's very generous of you. That's very kind. So I want to say thanks, Rich, for coming on today, and I appreciate all the information you've given. And I think this is going to help a lot of people. Thanks again, man. Looking forward to seeing you at the next event coming soon.